Angus. First and foremost, warmest congratulations on the wonderful prize. It was so richly deserved. I'm very sorry I can't be with you, but what I do want to do is to report on almost half a century of friendship, not just personal and academic, but also close family friends. Indeed, I think I know you're one of a very distinguished set of academic colleagues that my wife and children have never found boring. Let me try to say something about how I've learned from you and how we've interacted chronologically over those 5 decades, so maybe 1 minute each decade. We met first in the academic year 1969-70 at Jim Murley's Friday evening Nuffield seminar. You were doing estimation of demand systems. You spoke particularly fondly of Richard Stone, and you discussed some of the work you were doing with Alan Brown. We got talking, amongst other things, about Lagrange multipliers and elasticities of marginal utility of income, in part because I was playing around with optimum growth and taxation and struggling with ideas around distributional values. I think we decided pretty quickly that demand estimation couldn't tell us very much about distributional values, but we enjoyed that process. And we also concluded in those discussions that functional forms, apparently chosen for convenience of estimation or manipulation, can have very powerful effects on optimization results. In the 1970s, we also began our conversations on India, in my case including around Palanpur, the village I've been studying for more than 40 years. In the 1980s, we finally did a paper together. It was in part about the functional form issue I've just mentioned, but it was also about how to tax a good associated with an activity of which other, quotes, right-minded people might disapprove. Now, in my case, you might want to tax the disreputable activity of golf through taxation of golf clubs. Everybody has their own example. And in the 1980s, we continued sharing our enthusiasms for India. You visited Bangalore in 1981-82 when I was staying there with the whole family in the Bangalore Club and working at the Indian Statistical Institute. And that was the moment when I introduced you to Jean Drèze, who'd just become my student. In the 1990s, we kept in touch, but you were at Princeton and I was at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We both became more interested in the dynamics of change, perhaps the beginning of your thinking behind Great Escape, although obviously that thinking goes way back to your observations about your wonderful father, Leslie. I then was chief economist of the EBRD and trying to promote a transition, a structural change, a fundamental political and economic change from the market to the market economy from planned economies in Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. And I think around those ideas, we were both deeply puzzled and indeed troubled by observing a profession which was increasingly veering off towards or being trapped by market fundamentalism. Turning now to more recent decades, from 2000 to 2003, I was chief economist of the World Bank, and we saw much more of each other. You were key, absolutely key, to the international price comparison work, rescuing us from all sorts of mistakes, pointing us in all sorts of important and interesting directions. And you were a constant reminder of how little we knew and the dangers in the illusion or pretense that could entrap us, that illusion or pretense that we knew a great deal. We collaborated too on the Sarkozy, Sen and Stiglitz inquiry on well-being and measurement. I think we rescued it from some fairly wild conclusions, but at the same time, I hope we steered it towards some sensible directions, including emphasizing stocks, risks, often informed by measurement of stock, distribution of income and wealth, and the importance of asking about evidence on well-being. You were a very powerful influence on that, a clear example of your ability to translate deep thinking into real observation about the statistics that can inform and should inform decision making. But finally, Angus, there's a very big thank you. You not only inspired us by the depth and range of your work about the big issues of behaviour, well-being and poverty and how these things change over time, You also wisely stayed out of the policy kitchen. It may be that your self-knowledge guided you on this. It may not have been for you. But you taught so much to those of us who perhaps unwisely wandered into that kitchen. You constantly reminded us of the importance of intellectual integrity as well as personal integrity. And you constantly reminded us of the dangers of presumed knowledge. You've been inspiration, a teacher, a counsellor, and above all, an extraordinary friend. Someone to talk to about the things that really matter in life. Thank you so much, Angus, and I hope you have a wonderful celebration.
Hello everybody, my name is Jean Drez. I'm an old fan and friend of Angus Deaton and also a colleague of his from time to time. Needless to say, I was overjoyed a few months ago when I heard that Angus had won the Nobel Prize, and so were many other people in India. Indeed, there was a lot of excitement here when the word spread that the Nobel Prize in Economics had a strong connection with this country. One local newspaper here in Ranchi even claimed that Angus's work had been inspired by his experiences in Jharkhand, which is quite an exaggeration because I don't think Angus has ever been here. Of course, Angus has been to India many times, and I think that his work on India has influenced a lot of his other works, so I will say a few words about his Indian work. But before that, let me mention that I don't think of Angus only or even primarily as an economist. He is, of course, a brilliant economist, as anyone who cares to read his Nobel lecture would recognize. But I also think of Angus as one of the great public intellectuals of our time. And I am hoping that he will wear that hat more readily now that his work has received the recognition it deserves. Because there are big intellectual debates coming up in the near future about the kind of society we want to live in. For instance, what kind of healthcare system we need, what rich countries owe to poor countries, and how to contain economic inequality. And I think that in Angus's thoughts and ideas have an important contribution to make to these debates. Angus has become famous for a cartoon that shows him looking at the Earth through a microscope, but we could equally imagine him looking at it from the height of a satellite. Angus has many outstanding qualities as a public intellectual. For instance, he's a walking encyclopedia. Not only does Angus know a lot of economics, he also knows a lot about history, about healthcare, about India, not to speak of fly fishing and bird watching. He has a unique ability to read anything that catches his imagination, recognize the main insights, and remember them. Angus also has wonderful communication skills. He's an excellent practitioner of the KISS principle, K-I-S-S, which stands for Keep It Simple, Sweetie, in this part of the world. Some of Angus's work, of course, is quite complex by nature, but it is never more complicated than it needs to be. Also, Angus writes very clearly, which is not a common gift among economists. When I was an undergraduate student, my supervisor once told me, "So-and-so is a great economist. Very few people can understand him." Well, Angus is also a great economist, but on top of that, most of us can understand his writings and also enjoy them because he often writes beautifully too, as he did, for instance, in his wonderful book, The Great Escape. Having said this, I think that Angus's most important quality as a public intellectual is his exceptional integrity. I can hardly think of anyone who is more willing to accept evidence that goes against what he would prefer to see. And that is what the spirit of objective inquiry is all about. Objectivity, of course, does not require us to abandon our convictions. Angus has strong convictions, but he is always willing to submit them to scrutiny. This reinforces all his other qualities as a public intellectual. Let me now say a few words about Angus's work on India. This work focuses mainly on two related themes, poverty measurement and nutrition. As far as poverty measurement is concerned, Angus has written on almost all important aspects of the subject, including survey design, price indexes, economies of scale, the discrepancy between household surveys and national accounts, and of course, poverty trends over time. On all these issues, Angus has raised the standards of research and forced poverty experts to be more rigorous as well as more modest. I am sure that he agrees with John Maynard Keynes' statement that if economists could manage to get themselves thought of as a humble, competent people on a level with dentists, that would be splendid. Angus even wrote somewhere that there is no such thing as an expert on who is poor and who is not. That may sound like rhetoric, but it is actually an insightful remark, and I often think about it today as many Indian states are struggling with the difficult task of identifying poor households for the purpose of food subsidies under the National Food Security Act. This process raises many conceptual, practical, ethical, and political issues that economists can at best help to resolve. Turning to nutrition in India, Angus's work has focused largely on clarifying various puzzles. Angus has always been interested in puzzles. Indeed, in his short autobiographical essay, he refers to the trauma of being deprived of his beloved jigsaw puzzles when he had scarlet fever as a young child. So when Angus's legendary microscope turned to nutrition in India, he quickly saw many puzzles that were waiting to be solved, such as why are undernutrition levels in India higher than almost anywhere in the world? Why is undernutrition so common even among relatively well-off households? Why does per capita food consumption decline with household size? And last but not least, why has calorie consumption declined over time in spite of rapid economic growth? I have worked with Angus on the last puzzle, and let me tell you frankly that we have been far more successful at posing this puzzle than at solving it. The other puzzles are also largely unresolved. However, Angus's work has greatly enhanced our understanding of these puzzles as well as of possible answers and non-answers. I take this opportunity to mention that Angus is a dream colleague and co-author. Working with him is not only a great learning experience, but also a lot of fun. If there is one word that sums up my feelings for Angus, it is trust. I trust his intellect, I trust his judgment, and above all, I trust his integrity. It is as a mark of trust and affection that some of us here often call him Angus Uncle. So long live Angus Uncle.